Hey, Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Akakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders who are no stone for teaching us the truth. Salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Requai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, this is going to be a little bit of exhortation in regards to tribulation, in regards to feelings of dealing with low moments. Paul talks about abound and abased, and we certainly have seen different examples of our forefathers when they were doing well, and you saw moments when they were doing low, like Job, for example, right? Joseph, right? So I guess this is a bit of exhortation in terms of the title would be, using your tribulation to essentially get closer, to the Lord, right? That's realizing that's a very helpful perspective to how to look at tribulation also, right? Of course, it's to make us, refine us, make us more whole, make us not whole per se, but I guess more pure. It doesn't feel good, but there are things, there are benefits that come out of it, right? So using it as a mechanism to actually try and get closer to the Lord, right? Because when you see all these different things going on in the world, our people, not, their mindset is, that's the furthest thing from their mindset is to call upon Yahweh Shai, right? As a matter of fact, I guess I'll start off with this precept, because we see all these things going on in the world, the love of many waxing cold, excuse me, spirits created for vengeance, YN culture, excuse me, right? So, which really it's a degenerate culture. So, before all these, things, we see all this sedition among men and the people not regarding, because all these things are brewing when you really look at it. When you look at the political landscape of the West, and when you look at the civil unrest that's brewing amongst these different well-developed nations, that's what's really going on here. It's just so many different things going on at the same time, so the Lord is really stirring the pot, right? So in the midst of all these things, we can be going through tribulation, right? And in the midst of this tribulation, we can use that tribulation to get closer to the Lord, right? Because having that protection, that defense, having that rest, that comfort, especially in times of trouble, Jacob's trouble, is very, very beneficial, because we need someone to advocate on our behalf in those times, right? To look out for us, right? So this is Ecclesiastes 12:1, and it says, "Remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, while the evil days come not, nor the years draw nigh, when thou shalt say, I have no pleasure in them," right? So, our people's mindset is to, they're kind of more in that party and bullshit spirit. They're kind of more in that, what's that spirit? That, that song from Lion King. It's like Hakuna Matata. They're kind of more in that, that type of spirit, right? Thinking that everything is all good when everything is not all good, right? We screwed up, and we have an opportunity to be able to get closer to the Lord, right? Before He sends His Son, and obliterates this place, man. All teeth. What does it say in Jeremiah? It says, I have numbered. Let me see if I find that. Hold on. It's in Jeremiah 15. Okay, this is Jeremiah 15, verse 3, and it says, "And I will appoint over them four kinds, saith the Lord: the sword to slay, and the dogs to tear, and the fowls of the heaven, and the beasts of the earth to devour and destroy. Oh, let me read verse 2, and it says, And it shall come to pass, if they say unto thee, Whither shall we go forth? Then thou shalt tell them, Thus saith the Lord, such as, are for death to death, such as are for the sword to the sword, and such are for the famine to the famine, such as are for the captivity to the captivity. So the Lord has, all these different made judgments for all these different people, right? So, we wanted to be, protected in those times, right? From all this judgment, from the Lord's anger. That's why it says in Zephaniah, I believe it's the third or the second chapter, I believe it's the second chapter, where it says, Seek righteousness, seek meekness, that we may be hidden in the day of the Lord's wrath, right? So, okay, so going back in regards to the point I was making earlier, in regards to the tribulation that we go through within our daily lives, using it as an opportunity to actually, strengthen that relationship with the Lord, because it's very valuable, especially when you're in low moments, and not to neglect the Lord when we're in those moments where we're feeling kind of high. Not, I don't want to say high, but when you're feeling all right, you know what I'm saying? Because you go through those moments, there's highs and lows, ups and downs, right? So this is Hebrews 12 and 11, and it says, No chastening for the present seemeth to be joyous, but grievous. Nevertheless, afterward it yieldeth the peaceable fruit of righteousness unto them which are exercised thereby, right? So the chastening doesn't feel good, it's very uncomfortable, but the point is peaceable fruit, of righteousness. It helps, and it can, because you're in a situation where I'm like, yo, man, when you're in a situation when you don't have it like that, you're gonna be you want to be able to call on the Lord a lot more, right? And that's what He wants, right? Not these different false gods and all this type of shit. The type of person that thinks and they're in their security with their big fancy mansion, their house, their money in the bank, and so on and so forth, that's their security, right? But in the blink of an eye, all those things can be gone, and it's been shown. It's been shown in different instances. For example, with some of these different banks have had glitches, blackouts. People have their money, you know, showing in their bank account in a blink of an eye. It was gone, right? They didn't have access to it. And they realized they were tripping because all their eggs, they were kind of like essentially what was going on. They were kind of like in the rich man in that parable, where he had all his investments, his riches, and so on and so forth within those storehouses, but he didn't. What he lacked was a rich relationship. As a matter of fact, I'll read the last couple of verses of that parable. As a matter of fact, I'll just read the parable, and it says, Luke 12. Well, actually, I'll read the last verse, right? Because I just wanted to get two examples of that tribulation, from one of our forefathers and one of our foremothers, too, right? So this is Luke 12, verse 21. Verse 20, and it says, But the Most High said unto him, Thou fool, this night thy soul shall be required of thee. Then who shall those things be which thou hast provided? So is he that layeth treasure for himself and is not rich towards the Most High, Yahweh Bashem El Shai, right? So his investments were all in the wrong place, right? Yes, we use the world and we don't abuse it, right? But he had a lot more earthly riches than spiritual riches, right? He didn't have that deep, intimate connection with the Lord, right? So what I wanted to do, I wanted to get one example of an Israelite basically in their time of trouble, and they called upon the Lord, right? That tribulation that they were experiencing. So this is 2 Kings chapter 19, verse 1, and it says, "And it came to pass when King Hezekiah heard it, that he rent his clothes and covered himself with sackcloth and went into the house of the Lord. And he sent Eliakim, which was over the household, and Shebna the scribe, and the elders of the priests covered with sackcloth to Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amos, and said unto him, Thus saith Hezekiah, This day is a day of trouble, and of rebuke and blasphemy for the children that come to the birth, and there is not strength to bring forth. It may be the Lord Yahweh thy power will hear thee all the words of Rabshakeh, whom the king of Assyria his master hath sent to reproach the living power, and reprove the words which the Lord thy power hath heard. Wherefore lift up thy prayer for the remnant that are left." So the servants of the king Hezekiah came to Isaiah, and it says, Isaiah said unto them, Thus shall he say to your master, Thus saith the Lord, Be not afraid of the words which thou hast heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Right? So King Hezekiah is right now in a situation where, he has this king of Assyria, coming up against him and essentially kind of boasting in all these different places that he took down. I took down this place, took down that place, right? And he's kind of like, you know what? I could take down this place too, right? But this is what, the Lord pretty much threw a monkey wrench in his plan, right? Because he's boasting in his so-called accomplishments, this and that and this forth, and I've done this and I've done that. The scriptures say, let not a rich man boast in his riches, and let not a mighty man boast in his might, right? So what I want to do, I just want to jump down because it's quite a long chapter, right? Just bear with me. Let me just get straight to the point. So I'm just going to jump down to verse 32. And it says, Therefore, thus saith the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into this city, nor shoot an arrow there, nor come before it with shield, nor cast a bank against it. By the way, that he came, by the same he shall return, and shall not come into this city, saith the Lord. For I will defend this city to save it for my own sake and for my servant David's sake. And it came to pass that night, and the angel of the Lord went out and smote the camp of Assyrians, 180,500. And when they arose early in the morning, behold, they were all dead corpses. So essentially, being in this tribulation, King Hezekiah uses an opportunity, to essentially call upon the Lord, and basically make his supplication. You know what I'm saying? He made his supplication, right? he prayed before the Lord, right? Scriptures say that the prayers of the humble pierceth the clouds. And this was a king, right? So you can't even imagine the kinds of riches. And he could have easily been like, man, I got all these riches, I got all this, I got all that, you know, I got it. He could have been very, very prideful, but he didn't do that. You know, this is a king. I can't even imagine how much riches he had back then. You know, and those were real, actual riches, right? Not this, paper money that we have in our wallets these days, or plastic wherever you are, right in Canada. But the point is, he humbled himself, and even despite being a king, he still humbled himself and prayed, right? So making that supplication, and the Lord came to his defense, right? So, my next example, I'm going to go to the Apocrypha here. This is Susanna chapter 1 verse 28, and it says, and it came to pass the next day when the people assembled, her husband Joachim, the two elders came also full of mischievous imagination against Susanna to put her to death, and said before the people, send for Susanna the daughter of Chelcias, Joachim's wife. And so they sent. So she came with her father and mother and children and all her kindred. Now Susanna was a very delicate woman, beauteous to behold. And when these wicked men commanded to uncover her face, where was I? 1 second. Salakia, my thing is just kind of frozen. Okay, verse 32, and it says, and when these wicked men commanded to uncover her face, for she was covered, that they might filled with her beauty, then her friends and all that saw her wept. And the two elders stood up in the midst of the people and laid their hands upon her head. And when she weeping looked towards heaven, for her heart trusted in the Lord. And the elders said, as we walked in the garden alone, this woman came in with the two maids and shut the garden doors and sent the maids away. Then a young man there was hid, came unto her, lay with her. Then we that stood in the corner of the garden, seeing this wickedness, ran unto them. And when we saw them together, the man could not hold, for he was stronger than we, and opened the door and leapt out. But having taken this woman, we asked who the young woman was, but she would not tell us. These things we testify. Then the assembly believed all those that were the elders and the judges of the people, so they condemned her to death. And here's the point. Then Susanna cried out with a loud voice, saying, O everlasting power, Yahweh Bashem Shai, and thou knowest the secrets, and knoweth all things before they be. Thou knowest that they have borne false witness against me, right? So these elders, they had ranks and some status, using their platform to essentially bring up a false report, against Susanna. And these elders, they were very, very taken by her beauty, by her looks, how she looked, right? They couldn't get what they wanted, so make up false report, accuse her, make her seem like, somebody who she's really not, somebody, an adulterous woman, right? So, and again, going back to the point, this tribulation, she prayed to the Lord, in the midst of this tribulation, right? And when you go throughout later on in the story, the Lord put a spirit on a man named Daniel to be able to cross-examine, what you would call a cross-examination in a courtroom today, to look into the testimonies of these elders, right? So the point really is, in the situation, this tribulation, using that as an opportunity to, get close to the Lord, right? And this is something, as through observation, learning more of when the Lord, shows you certain things, learning more about when the Lord is speaking to you, you know what I'm saying, in those situations. So your level of what's the word I'm looking for, discernment, increases, spiritual gifts, because you start to, be more in tune with the frequent with a I guess with a frequency, so to speak. You start to be more in tune with, knowing when the Lord is speaking to you, talking to you, having that deep relationship, right? That intimacy, right? So that's pretty much, the topic, using the tribulation, because the tribulation is given, right? You're gonna go through ups and downs, but using it as an opportunity to, kindle that relationship with the Lord, right? So you gotta get an understanding of, oh man, this is when the Lord is talking to me, man. Okay, this is when, okay, the Lord is showing me signs here, right? Let me, pay attention to this, right? Recognizing patterns. That's another thing. So, anyways, I guess I'll leave it here. But I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson was edifying. I just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Ba'ashem Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.